And the reason that we have you on this podcast is not because of all the experience that you had dealing drugs and producing drugs, but it's because of the light bulb moment you had in prison and where you found comedy, which was ultimately your calling. Talk us through how comedy impacted your time in prison. Understand that, you know, making people laugh was something that you found brought you a bit of entertainment value, a bit of peace and happiness, and others' happiness in there that too that were serving time.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't say I was in there cracking gags every day of the week because, like, if you say the wrong joke
Right.
in prison, things can go pear shaped pretty quickly, you know. So I tried to keep a pretty low profile. Any guys that did time with me would probably say that I try to be pretty invisible. I just hung to my mates and hung and walked around and trained. But there were so many funny things that would happen in jail. You know, blokes would crack a joke, or you know, there was a day in the yard at Park Lee where the guards were calling out for a guy named David Wilson, and then suddenly a whole yard full of like inmates in maximum security are going, Wilson, I'm sorry, Wilson, and doing this like Tom Hanks impression. And like, it was so funny because of where we were. And I laughed so hard. And when I was laughing, I forgot about the barbed wire fences and the guards and the cameras, and I was free. And then I remembered where I was, and I was like, holy shit, laughter is such a powerful agent. If it can make you forget you're in prison, then that really opened my eyes to it and made me remember that I'd always wanted to do comedy, but I was just too much of a pussy to try. And at that point, I was just like, well, look where you are. I can't really get any worse. Maybe you should try it when you get out. But yeah, it was just laughter is just so powerful and transportive. And when I was in lockup and it made me forget, that's when I was like, if I can spend my life making people laugh and forget about their own shit, even for a few minutes, that seems like something that I want to dedicate my life to.
Yep. And the Confit boys, they were talking about training to be free. That's, I guess, the mantra of Confit Pathways. For you, it was like make people piss themselves laughing to be free kind of thing. Was it? It was almost like gave people the opportunity to have some fun there. In terms of like you found comedy in prison, but from an actual professional sense, how did you actually get into it once you had left prison? So I guess, you know, did you go to any agencies or, you know, were there calls in the, you know, online that you had put your name down? Like, how did it all work?
Yeah, cool. I was under house arrest at my parents' place, and so I wasn't allowed to leave the house unless I was in the company of my mum and dad. And I was on Facebook, and I saw an ad for a open mic comedy competition. It was the biggest one in the country. It's called Raw, and so I signed up for that, and I got accepted for one of the heats for that. And so I was like, shit. If I'm going to do this, I better start going to some open mic comedy nights and practicing my material. And so I did that. And the first open mic comedy night I ever went to was one called Crown Comedy, which is at the Lewisham Hotel every Thursday. And I went there with my mum, and because I wasn't allowed out of the house unless I was in the company of my parents. So I had to bring my mum to my first ever open mic comedy gig. And it was the kind of these open mic comedy gigs. There's many of them that have something called a bucket pull, which is essentially you put your name in a bucket and then they just draw it out randomly. So you don't know when you're going to be on. But I had to ask if I could go on early because I had a bail curfew. And so can imagine when you're with a whole bunch of other open mic comedians that all think that they should be going on early because they're very important. And then suddenly some guy who's never done it before is like, oh, I need to go on early because of my bail curfew. They were like, oh, no worries, brother. They thought that was funny. And then I did the jokes, and it was so nerve-wracking because, you know, I'd never done it before, and you're just standing up in front of all these people. And so I just try to just say the words of what I'd memorized, and I didn't really know anything about performance. It was just all about just saying the words, and I got laughs. And as soon as I got some laughs, that just made me relax a bit more. And then at the end, a few people came up to me and they're like, that was awesome. And then I just kept coming luckily soon after my bail rules were relaxed, so I didn't have to come with my mum. So I didn't put her through the torture of open mic comedy, which is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. But yeah, so I started doing that most nights and just try to do as many of those before I did this comedy competition, Raw. And then I did the competition and I did great, and I ended up making it through to the state final after I'd only been doing comedy for for maybe like 4 or 5 weeks at that point. And then that's the way it started. I just continued on doing comedy 4 or 5 nights a week. It just became my obsession. And luckily, that was a huge part of our case. When I got sentenced, the judge really liked the story of me rehabilitating myself through comedy. He acknowledged that it was not one that he'd ever heard before. That's not usually an argument in Sydney courts. Like, Your Honour, this is how I've rehabilitated myself. I'm telling dick jokes on stage.